trees, silence. When people imagine New Jersey, they picture highways, suburbs, and crowded shorelines. But drive far enough into the forests and something unexpected appears. Entire towns that no longer exist. Not ancient ruins, not archaeological sites, real communities that lived, worked, and vanished within a single generation. Iron furnaces went cold, mills burned, industries collapsed. Families simply left, leaving streets where no one walks anymore. These places aren't unsettling because of ghost stories. They're unsettling because of history. And in one of these towns, historians still quietly ask the same question. Why did everyone leave so suddenly? Batstow Village. We begin with a place that almost feels too peaceful to belong on this list. Hidden within the vast forests of the Pine Barrens sits Batstow Village, a settlement that once fueled an entire colonial industry. In the 18th century, Batstow thrived on bog iron production. Workers harvested iron from the marshy soil and fed furnaces that produced tools, weapons, and materials for a growing nation. During the American Revolutionary War, this quiet forest village helped supply the colonial cause. But industries change. By the late 19th century, cheaper iron sources made Batstow's operation obsolete. The furnaces cooled, workers left, a thriving industrial village slowly emptied. Today the buildings remain preserved. White houses, old workshops, empty roads beneath towering pines. Not unsettling because of ghosts, but because it feels like time stopped mid-sentence. And deeper in the Pine Barrens, there are places where time did not pause so gently. Ong's Hat. And if Batstow faded slowly, Ong's Hat disappeared almost completely. Once a small stagecoach stopped along an early road through the Pine Barrens, the settlement existed mostly as a few buildings and a clearing in the forest. Its unusual name comes from an old story. A traveler named Jacob Ong supposedly tossed his hat into a tree after losing a bet. The hat stayed. The town's name followed, but by the early 20th century, the settlement itself was gone. No houses remain today, no streets, barely even foundations. Not because of a disaster, because people simply stopped coming. What remains instead are rumors, strange stories about secret experiments, hidden research facilities, and bizarre conspiracy theories that grew decades later. Historians dismiss most of them, but the emptiness of the place still invites speculation. And in the Pine Barrens, abandoned places rarely stay quiet for long. Double Trouble Village. The name alone sounds like something borrowed from folklore, but Double Trouble Village was once a practical, hard-working place, a lumber and cranberry operation tucked deep inside the Pine Barrens. In the late 19th century, the settlement grew around a sawmill that processed enormous amounts of timber taken from the surrounding forests. The industry shaped everything. Workers built modest homes nearby, families settled in, expecting the kind of stability that small company towns often promised. A school appeared, along with a general store and a few churches. Life moved at a steady pace, tied closely to the daily operation of the mill and the seasonal work of the cranberry bogs. For years, the system held together. But the village depended almost entirely on a single source of employment. When the sawmill eventually shut down, the change was immediate. The machinery stopped, wagons no longer carried lumber out of the forest, and the jobs that had supported the community disappeared. Without the mill, there was little reason for families to remain. One by one, residents began leaving in search of work elsewhere. Houses emptied, shops closed their doors. The routines that had once filled the village slowly faded into silence. By the early 20th century, Double Trouble stood largely abandoned. Today, several of the buildings still remain, weathered houses beside quiet cranberry bogs, surrounded by dense forest that has grown thicker with time. Not because of violence or disaster, but because entire communities can disappear when a single industry collapses. And as we move deeper into New Jersey's forgotten places, the disappearances become less gradual. Whitesbog Village. At first glance, Whitesbog Village appears to be nothing more than a quiet agricultural settlement resting in the Pine Barrens. The landscape feels calm, low buildings, sandy paths, and wide cranberry bogs reflecting the sky. In many ways, that peaceful impression is accurate, But the history of this place quietly reshaped American agriculture. In the early 20th century, farmer Elizabeth Coleman White began working with botanist Frederick Coville to cultivate a fruit that had previously grown only in the wild, the blueberry. Their experiments took place right here in White's Bog, and where sandy soil and careful selection of wild plants eventually produced the first commercially cultivated blueberry varieties. What started as small experimental plots soon became a national agricultural breakthrough. Blueberry farming spread across the country, transforming a once wild berry into a major commercial crop. For a time, White's Bog thrived. Workers tended cranberry bogs and experimental fields. Warehouses stored harvests, and the small company towns supported the labor that kept everything running. But agricultural industries changed just as industrial ones do. As commercial farming expanded into other regions and production shifted elsewhere, the settlement gradually lost its central purpose. Workers moved away, buildings emptied, the fields remained, but the community surrounding them slowly faded. And today, visitors can walk past old warehouses and quiet houses beside the cranberry bogs, where sunlight still reflects across calm water, not unsettling because something terrible happened, but because even successful communities can quietly fade when the economy moves on. And deeper in the Pine Barrens, some towns disappeared far less gently. Speedwell. Some ghost towns are hidden deep in forests, slowly swallowed by trees and silence. Others disappear in a different way, fading beneath layers of modern history until only fragments remain. Speedwell, in Morris County, was once one of the small industrial settlements that helped power early American manufacturing. During the 18th century, its ironworks produced tools, hardware, and mechanical parts that supported a growing colonial economy. The furnaces burned steadily, and workers built homes close to the site, creating a modest but productive community. For many years, the village thrived. Iron production required skilled labor, steady supplies of fuel, and constant demand for finished goods. As long as those conditions existed, towns like Speedwell could sustain themselves. Wagons carried iron products out to surrounding markets, and the settlement maintained the quiet stability typical of many early industrial communities. But the 19th century brought a different kind of change. Large mechanized factories began appearing in expanding cities. Transportation networks improved. Railroads allowed industrial production to concentrate in bigger centers, where materials and labor could move more efficiently. Small iron villages suddenly faced competition they could not match. Gradually, the furnaces cooled. Workers relocated to larger industrial hubs where wages and opportunities were greater. Businesses closed their doors, and the small settlement that once supported an essential industry simply dissolved. Not because of fire or violence, but because economic progress quietly erased it. Today, only scattered historical references hint that Speedwell once existed as a working industrial community. And sometimes when a town disappears that completely, what remains is not ruin, but absence. And further south in New Jersey, there are places where the ruins are impossible to ignore. Harrisville. Deep in Wharton State Forest, Harrisville still carries the quiet scars of a single catastrophic night. In the 19th century, the village existed almost entirely because of a paper mill built along nearby streams. And water powered the machinery. Timber from surrounding forests supplied raw materials, and workers settled in modest houses clustered around the factory grounds. Life in Harrisville followed a steady industrial rhythm. The hum of machinery, the movement of wagons, the daily routine of a small but functioning company town. For years, the system worked, but in 1914, everything changed. A fire broke out within the mill complex and quickly spread through the wooden structures. Fueled by dry materials and industrial equipment, the flames moved faster than anyone could control. By the time the fire burned out, the central industry that sustained the town had been destroyed. Without the mill, Harrisville had little reason to exist. Jobs vanished almost immediately, and workers who had depended on the factory for their livelihood began leaving within weeks, seeking opportunities elsewhere in the region. Families packed their belongings, closed their doors, and walked away from homes they had expected to keep for years. The town emptied quickly. Today, the forest has grown around what remains. Stone foundations, fragments of walls, and scattered ruins sit quietly among the trees, barely visible beneath layers of moss and fallen leaves, not because of superstition, but because a single industrial accident can erase an entire community. Yet some ghost towns linger for decades, surviving repeated attempts to bring life back. And the next place on this list carries a far stranger history: Atzian Village. Atzian Village once stood as a small but determined industrial community in the Pine Barrens. And during the 18th and 19th centuries, it operated as both an ironworks and glass-making settlement, drawing on the natural resources that surrounded it. The sandy soil provided materials for glass production, while nearby forests supplied the fuel needed to keep furnaces burning. For a time, the arrangement worked. Workers built homes near the factories. Wagons moved along narrow roads carrying timber, sand, and finished goods. Life in the village followed the steady rhythm of industry and forestry, each supporting the other. But industries rarely stay stable forever. As demand shifted and regional resources slowly thinned, maintaining production became harder. Transportation costs increased, competition grew, and the once reliable operations began to struggle. Owners tried to adapt. The facilities changed hands more than once, and different investors attempted to revive production. Factories reopened, then closed again. Each new effort kept the town alive a little longer, but none could restore its earlier momentum. Gradually, workers began leaving for more stable opportunities elsewhere. Families packed their belongings and moved toward growing cities and new industries. The village did not collapse overnight. It simply grew quieter. Today, a handful of historic buildings still stand near Atchin Lake, their pale walls reflected in calm water and surrounded by thick forest. The structures remain as reminders of a place that once expected to endure, not because of tragedy, but because sometimes a town fades slowly, long after everyone realizes it cannot survive. And deeper in New Jersey's forgotten landscapes, the silence only grows heavier. Prairie Feltville, the deserted village. At the edge of the Watchung Reservation stands a place locals often call simply the deserted village. Its official name is Feltville, and in the 1840s it began as a carefully planned textile mill town. A single road ran through the settlement, lined with modest worker houses built in neat rows. The factory stood at the center of everything, its machinery driving the rhythm of daily life. A general store supplied the residents. Families settled in, expecting stability. For a time, the village functioned exactly as its founders intended, a small, orderly industrial community. But like many company towns of the 19th century, Feltville depended entirely on one fragile thing: the success of the mill. When the textile operation eventually failed, the town's future collapsed with it. Workers moved away, and the houses that once held families began to sit quietly along the empty road. Several investors tried to bring life back to the settlement. At one point, the village was converted into a summer resort, marketed as a peaceful escape from the growing cities nearby. Later, other plans emerged to transform it into a private residential community. Each attempt faded. People arrived for a time. Then they left again. By the early 20th century, the buildings stood mostly empty, their purpose never fully restored. Windows darkened, doors remained closed. The road that once carried the sounds of everyday life grew silent. Today, those houses still stand in a long row beneath the trees. Weathered wood, shuttered windows, and quiet porches facing a road that leads nowhere in particular. Not because of ghosts, but because every effort to rebuild life here eventually failed. And that pattern of repeated abandonment gives Feltville a quiet, lingering weight. Still, the final place on this list leaves historians with an even deeper question. Friendship. Some towns fade slowly, their decline stretching across decades as businesses close and families drift away one by one. Others disappear far more completely, leaving behind almost nothing except faint historical records and a quiet patch of land where something once stood. Friendship was one of those places. In the 19th century, this small settlement in the Pine Barrens existed for a single purpose: glassmaking. The region's sandy soil provided the raw materials needed for glass production, while the endless forests surrounding the village supplied the fuel that kept the furnaces burning day and night. For a time, the arrangement worked. Workers arrived, homes were built, and the glow of the furnaces marked the center of a growing community. But glass production demanded enormous amounts of wood. Each day, trees were cut and hauled to feed the fires that shaped molten sand into bottles and window panes. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the forests surrounding the settlement began to thin. As nearby timber disappeared, the cost of transporting fuel from farther away increased. The industry that had created the town suddenly struggled to survive. When the furnaces finally shut down, the town's future vanished with them. Workers moved on to other opportunities. Families packed their belongings and left behind the houses they had once expected to live in for generations. Without the constant rhythm of industry, the buildings deteriorated quickly under the harsh coastal climate. Years passed, then decades. Rain, wind, and creeping vegetation slowly erased the visible traces of the settlement. Roads faded, foundations collapsed. Eventually, the Pine Barrens reclaimed the land entirely. Today, almost nothing marks where friendship once stood. No streets, few ruins, just trees. Not because of legend, but because entire communities can disappear so completely that only the land remembers them. And in places like the Pine Barrens, the forest is very good at remembering. Ghost towns rarely end with dramatic final moments. Most fade quietly. An industry fails. A fire burns too much. A generation moves away, and the place where people once built homes slowly returns to silence. Across New Jersey, these forgotten settlements still exist, hidden in forests, buried beneath development, or preserved as quiet historical sites. They aren't frightening places, but walking through them leaves a strange feeling, because every empty road once led somewhere, and every abandoned town once believed it had a future.